As we're coming on the air, feels like everybody's bracing for a not-so-merry COVID-ish Christmas because that Omicron variant's messing with plans just a few days out from most people's holiday break. Mask rules are back in, markets are down, and vaccine mandates, they're all over the place right now. Coming up live, one of the country's top epidemiologists to break down what we should be thinking about before we see our families this weekend. Here in Washington, the president's agenda hanging on by a thread after Senator Joe Manchin says he just can't support the Build Back Better bill, and things are getting kind of snippy. We'll talk about the path forward, if there is one, and how long it could take. Plus, Kim Potter's future now in the hands of a jury, deliberating about the ex-cop who shot and killed Daunte Wright. Our reporter inside court will tell us how the jury reacted when a member of her defense team slammed a table during the closing. And we're going to get the backstory behind a powerful documentary that shows us how women of color deal with the mental and physical pain of infertility. Our Chanel Jones on why their stories are so personal to her. And with costs in Silicon Valley going up, families getting priced out of their homes. In today's original, we'll show you how people who have experienced homelessness are working with others to try and wipe out this problem altogether. Hey, I'm Hallie, and welcome to your winter surge. Even though it's beginning to feel a lot like last March, it's not, right? We have vaccines now. We have treatments for COVID. But the lines for testing, they're nuts. If you can't find a rapid test, you're not alone. And for people who are not vaccinated, the White House is warning just in the last couple hours, you are going to feel this the most. Here's what it's looking like across the country. The Omicron variant's been identified in almost every state, 45 states, with 31 states, plus D.C. here, seeing a spike in cases. And when it comes to testing, we mentioned those lines. Here they are all across the country. You got to think these are folks getting checked out before they head out for the holidays to see friends and families. Some cities are going back to new restrictions. Where I am in Washington, the mayor is reinstating an indoor mask mandate. Boston is requiring proof of your vax status at restaurants, gyms, and other spots. The NBA is postponing at least 5 games. The NFL and the NHL all doing the same thing as more players and staff test positive. And because of all of this, because of all of today's news and the uncertainty around Omicron, markets took a nosedive, with the Dow closing down some 400-plus points. I want to get to Gabe Gutierrez, who is at a testing site in New York. Gabe, New York has been seeing this record number of cases for 3 days straight, right? We just heard from Governor Hochul. Talk me through the big headlines.
Hey there, Hallie. Well, actually, it's now 4 straight days, 4 consecutive days that New York State has seen a record number of COVID cases. And behind me, you can see this is just one testing site. These lines, as they have been for several days, have been stretching around the block, Hallie. So Governor Hochul, she is trying to make the case that it is essential for people to get vaccinated and boosted. And something she said today, Hallie, that was key, that a lot of parents have been wondering is, will schools close during this Omicron surge? She vowed that that would not happen. New York State will be buying 2 million tests. And the key is, she says, to get many of these students tested and let them stay in the classroom. Now, as you know, Hallie, over in D.C. where you are, you mentioned that reinstituting of a mask mandate. D.C. schools actually will also close for 2 days next month so that parents can pick up some of these at-home testing kits. But that is a big question right now. Yes, the cases are going higher, but will schools need to close? The governor here in New York says no.
I'm looking at that line behind you, Gabe. That's the end of the line, right? It goes down the block and around the block where you are. I mean, that looks...
So,
go ahead.
My cameraman, Miguel Terran. Yes, so my cameraman, Miguel Terran, will kind of show you. The line goes all the way up there. So, yes, what we were showing you earlier was the end of the line. Now you're seeing the start of the line. And, Hallie, this is something we've been seeing all across Manhattan.
That's right.
Really, all across many of the boroughs here in New York. Some of these clinics actually stopped taking people earlier in the day. They said that they just didn't have enough tests. They only had about 150 or so. Once they ran out of those, they sent people home. This one is still open, though.
You see it. I'm just so struck by how much that does look like what we saw in the early days of the pandemic. And we can't say it enough. This is not the same as those early days, but it doesn't feel great, right? You have in New York there, they're asking for the White House to step in and try to help with the production of more at-home tests, right? It's through something called the Defense Production Act.
Yeah,
but we heard the White House, Gabe, as you know, pretty non-committal on that today, kind of saying, hey, we've already put billions in that.
Yeah, and Mayor Bill de Blasio has been saying that, urging the White House to get more involved and to make testing more available. And in fact, many of the folks our team has spoke with in line say they're wondering why there isn't more testing. However, the White House says that President Biden is supposed to speak tomorrow, is scheduled to speak tomorrow, and outline some more COVID policies regarding testing and vaccination. We're told that he will stay away, though, from lockdowns or anything like that, Hallie.
Yeah, they're saying no, this is not going to be a lockdown speech. Gabe Gutierrez, in what I think is your 21st month straight covering the COVID pandemic, out there on the front lines as you always are. Gabe, thank you so much for being with us. I appreciate it. You had Dr. Fauci warning today, too, that we haven't even seen the full scope of Omicron yet. I want to bring in, speaking of O's, Dr. Michael Osterholm, one of the nation's top epidemiologists, who is joining us now. Doctor, good evening, and thanks for being on the news show for the first time.
Thank you.
You've called what's happening right now a potential perfect storm. Why?
Well, what we have right now in many hospitals in the Northeast is actually still the Delta virus is causing the majority of hospitalizations, severe illnesses, and deaths. But that is rapidly changing with Omicron coming into around the country, into our communities, and actually very rapidly taking over. What I worry about very much right now is that while we'll see a lot more transmission, and I think we have to be careful about how we use those numbers and number of cases, because they could grow substantially and give people the sense that this is like it was last fall, except that many more cases, because I think we're going to see many more milder cases. Okay. But the problem is that even with the greatest efforts we can put forward right now, with that increased transmission, we're going to see potentially as many people seriously ill as we currently have with Delta, with Omicron. Now, the reason I say that there's a perfect storm here is at the same time we expect to see 20 or 30% of healthcare workers getting sick, at least being infected with this virus, just like the rest of us. And that is going to put a major roadblock into providing what has already been a very challenged care system from doing what they need to do.
I have to ask you, Dr. Osterholm, and listen, maybe this is my own sort of peer group and social media bubble here, but I've heard and seen just so much, anecdotally, of course, that is the attitude of this. Well, this is so transmissible. We're all probably going to get it anyway, even if we're vaccinated. You know, it'll be mild. We're all going to get it. For people who live with people who are immunocompromised or who cannot get vaccinated, right, because they're too young or medically unable to, that feels kind of unacceptable, right? What is your assessment here? Is it nearly inevitable? Should folks be thinking, sure, I'm going to get this eventually, or can this really, be stopped?
Well, there is a good likelihood that many people will get the infection, but let's take a step back. Right now, only 1/3 of all the people who have received 2 doses of the mRNA vaccines have had that 3rd dose. I don't like to call it a booster because I think it is really a full vaccination schedule today. Should include 3 doses. So first of all, avoid serious illness with Delta right now, which is happening with a number of breakthroughs. We've had 800 deaths here in Minnesota among those who have had 2 doses of vaccine, not 3. And many of them are older and immune compromised, as you just pointed out, but nonetheless it's there. So get boosted immediately. If you do the same thing for Omicron, what you accomplish is you may not prevent yourself from getting infected, but you'll greatly reduce the likelihood of severe illness, hospitalizations, or deaths. So either way, you want to get vaccinated right now. And the other thing to note, Hallie, we're going into the holidays right now. It takes 14 days largely to have a good immune response after that booster dose. So don't think you're going to go in and get vaccinated the morning before the big holiday event and you're going to be protected. That's not the case at all.
To that point, Dr. Ashish Jha, who is a friend of this show, who I know you know, predicted on NPR that January is going to be a month where we'll see maybe more infections than we've seen in any month in this whole pandemic. Do you think that's assessment is something that you would agree with?
Well, I've been talking about the viral blizzard for the last 2 weeks, and I think it's going to be just that, a viral blizzard. And I think we're going to see many, many more cases. The question that we still have is how many of those will be severely ill, requiring hospitalization. We don't know that yet, but I think we have the likelihood of seeing a substantial number of those still end up in hospitals.
Last one for you here. When you look at the data, and I know there's very little data as it relates to Omicron right now, at least on a large scale, what do you do if you are somebody who is vaccinated and boosted, you get COVID, but somebody in your household is unvaccinated or immunocompromised? What are the chances you pass that variant on to them?
I think it's a very high likelihood. This is a highly infectious virus.
Yeah.
We've had numerous experiences in restaurants and college campuses, any number of places where we've seen such dynamic transmission to hundreds of people. And so I think that there is a very high likelihood in that setting that could happen. So please, that's why you need to get vaccinated now.
Dr. Osterholm, it is great to have you. Your words on a viral blizzard are certainly well heard. I know that's the alarm you've been sounding. Appreciate you being with us tonight.
Thank you. To
the world of politics now, where a key piece of the president's agenda looks basically dead, but maybe not buried altogether, with the White House now insisting they will get the Build Back Better Act passed. But you know that's not going to be this year. That's after Senator Joe Manchin came out and dropped a verbal grenade over on Fox News, saying he would not support the bill. Then the White House came out with its own grenade via statement, if you will, blasting the senator's position. So then Manchin hit the radio in West Virginia today, blaming White House staff for the breakdown in negotiations inside his own party. Watch.
There's basically, and it's staff. It's staff-driven. I understand staff. It's not the president. It's the staff. And they drove some things, and they put some things out that were absolutely inexcusable. They know what it is, and that's it.
Rather cryptic from the senator there. He says the reason for his opposition here is the stuff he's been sounding the alarm on the whole time, right? Inflation risk, the debt increase. But NBC News is reporting he's also partly worried that parents might use the child tax credit payment to buy drugs or take paid leave time to go hunting instead, according to multiple sources familiar with those comments. A spokesperson for the senator saying that Senator Manchin has made clear he supports the child tax credit and believes the money should be targeted to those who need it most. He's also expressed support for a paid leave program that has a dedicated, sustainable funding mechanism. Now, that child tax credit that, remember, was part of that bigger bill is something that West Virginia mom Stormy Johnson needs. She needs it to literally put food on her table, literally. I talked with her today.
This child tax credit was helping me to be able to put food on the table for my kids. And without that, the reality of it is I'll go without eating so my kids don't have to.
Joining me now from the White House is our White House correspondent, Monica Alba. So, Mon, I wanted to have our viewers hear from Stormy Johnson there, right? Because this isn't Beltway policy insider talk. We're talking about things that will directly affect people. People like Ms. Johnson there, you know, single mom of 3 kids, who's relying on that child tax credit, isn't going to get it in January now, may not get it ever, to help her be able to put food on her table, right? How do you unravel these next steps for the White House and Senator Manchin, who's got a lot of power here, and right now they're at loggerheads?
Very real concerns, Hallie, as you just saw there. And a little bit of breaking news, I can tell you right now, the Hill team and our own team has just been able to confirm that Senator Manchin and President Biden did speak at some point last evening. We don't have all the details of that conversation, but that is a piece of the puzzle that was missing today. And I add that to the conversation because that is where the White House sees this going next. They don't think the door is completely closed on this, and they think talks are going to continue. But of course, Senator Manchin made his position completely clear yesterday. The White House blasted him in that super long 700-word statement. But again, today there was a little bit of a shift in tone from the White House saying the two men have been longtime friends for years. They respect one another, and they want to see if more can be done on this in the new year. So they are kind of punting a couple of weeks from now, Hallie, but as you know so well, that doesn't resolve how they would actually get this legislation passed or to any point of reality, just that it seems this thing isn't completely dead, maybe mostly dead.
What's so interesting, Mon, is listening to the press secretary, Jen Psaki, talk about this today. They didn't back away from that long statement that you mentioned, right? That pretty intense statement. They stood by it, but also she was careful to talk about, you know, dodged questions on whether the president felt betrayed, emphasized the longstanding relationship between President Biden and Senator Manchin. And now this breaking news from our teams, who I know have been working on this all day. We didn't know if the two had spoken since then or if this was like a silent detente between the two. So super interesting, this news that you're reporting right here, breaking on the show, that they did have a conversation. I know we don't know much more about the details, but the fact that they spoke is in and of itself newsworthy.
I completely agree. And all day long we were asking, and we even asked the press secretary in the briefing to weigh in. And she was very cagey about it and said, I'm not going to read out any conversations. But clearly these are two lawmakers from the president's own experience for decades, a veteran of Capitol Hill, who had been speaking. Remember, it was Senator Manchin who was personally trying to negotiate a lot of these details. But what we don't know, and some of the questions now go to, it seems like Senator Manchin brought forth his own version or counter proposal proposal last week to the White House, something the White House clearly did not accept. But even just days ago, the president was saying things like, we're going to bridge our differences. We think Senator Manchin can get there. And then the entire thing imploded. And just to bring people a little bit behind the scenes, yesterday, Senator Manchin gave the White House a really short heads up about this Fox News interview. And when the White House tried to get in touch with him, to speak with him directly, to try to really convince him maybe not to do this, he didn't take the call, Hallie. So that spoke to how things were going then. But it does seem at least things have been a little bit at least course corrected so that the conversation is ongoing. The tenor of those talks will report out further.
Yeah, it's a move to hit decline, right, when the call is coming from inside the White House. Monica Alba at the North Lawn. Mon, thank you. The case in the Kim Potter trial tonight in the hands of the jury as we speak after a day of closing arguments from both the prosecution and defense. Remember, Kim Potter, she's the former Brooklyn Center police officer who shot and killed 20-year-old Dante Wright at a traffic stop last April after she says she mistook her gun for her taser. The prosecution trying to make the case today, again, their last words to the jury, that even though Potter had years of training, she recklessly used her gun, which created a risk to everyone around her. Watch.
We're here because this was entirely preventable, totally avoidable. If she had followed her training and paid attention to what she was doing and considered the risk.
But the defense has been countering this, right? They're sticking to their claim that Potter didn't know she'd pulled her gun, so she couldn't have recklessly used one, and that Potter herself is not responsible for Wright's death.
Dante Wright realizes there's a warrant for his arrest, and he knows what it is. So within seconds, he all of a sudden breaks away. That's the cause, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. That's what caused this whole incident.
I want to bring in from Minneapolis, NBC's Ron Allenow, who's been covering basically every minute of this trial. Ron, it's good to see you. So the jury has the case. In the last couple hours since they've had it, any questions to the judge? Have we heard from them at all yet? They're still behind closed doors?
They did ask one question of the judge about the timing of an interview that Potter did with one of the defense expert witnesses who was a psychologist trying to explain how people do what he called action errors. Like when you write the date of a check from in the following year from the previous year, or when you're used to doing one thing but you do something else. It's unclear exactly why the jury asked about this. It seems that they're trying to find inconsistencies in what Potter might have said during different interviews along the way. But that's all we've heard. The bottom line is they're deliberating. The judge has said she's going to give them a few more hours tonight, and they're sequestered. And so we'll see if they have any more questions or a quick verdict.
You had the defense. We saw a little bit. We saw a little bit of that flavor from the defense attorneys in the piece that we played, that little clip there. But it's been pretty aggressive, I think is fair to say, right? The defense attorney, Earl Gray, at one point, slamming his fist on the table during the closing. The tone has definitely been pretty assertive. How's that playing in the room?
Well, they have been very aggressive from the beginning. The defense attorneys said that they were going to reclaim Potter's reputation and her good name in their opening statements, and that's what they have been trying to do throughout this trial. And they clearly are trying to convince the jury that Dante Wright caused his own death, and that had he not resisted arrest, had he not gotten back in the car, that none of this would have happened. The prosecution, for its part, says, yes, that happened. Yes, he should have been arrested, but you can't shoot people and kill them when you're trying to arrest them. You have to be reasonable. And they insist that Potter used unreasonable force. The jury, for its part, has seen hours, I should dare say, of video. The amount of video, police body cam video and dash cam video, has been enormous. A lot of it's seen by the public for the first time. There's been a lot of emotion, testimony from Dante Wright's mother, his father, from his girlfriend, the passenger in the car. It's all been very intense. And Potter's testimony, of course, was also very emotional. So the jury has been hit with a lot. I mean, this was not just this was a really intense case. Yeah. And it's really unclear how they've been affected by it. This is a situation where there are pool reporters. Because of COVID, there are limited people in the courtroom. The jury is to be anonymous, so we can't discuss and don't know a lot about them. And so it's hard to sort of guess what they're thinking. It's always hard to guess what they're thinking, and even harder under these circumstances.
Ron Allen, it's such important context and perspective. Ron, thank you so much. Thanks for staying on top of this one. I'm sure we'll see you in the next couple days. Different trial now. Federal prosecutor looking to send Ghislaine Maxwell to prison is calling her, quote, a sophisticated predator. That's the phrase, sophisticated predator, that the prosecution wants to stick in the minds of the jury as they just started deliberations right as we were coming on the air, right? Closing arguments are done. You're looking at Maxwell this morning walking. Those are her siblings. That's her brothers and sister walking arm in arm into court right as closing arguments wrapped up. It's one of the few times we've actually seen her during this sex trafficking trial. She's facing 6 federal counts related to her years-long association with convicted rapist Jeffrey Epstein. Maxwell's also charged with enticing a minor to travel for illegal sex acts, actually transporting a minor for those illegal sex acts, and sex trafficking. Each of those charges also has a conspiracy count attached to it. She has pleaded not guilty to all of it. The government's lawyer laid out 8 reasons why they believe jurors should convict her, including explosive testimony from the house manager who called her the lady of Epstein's house. The 3 alleged victims who testified also spoke, as well as they're pointing to the money that she got from the convicted pedophile. As for the defense team, they say Maxwell is sticking with the story that she was wrongfully accused and that Epstein is the master manipulator behind all this. Our team in the courtroom says Maxwell was often looking over at the jury for their reactions during the closing arguments. You got the trial up against a bit of a schedule here, kind of tight because court closes for Christmas there on Thursday. We're also on verdict watch in the Elizabeth Holmes trial, where a jury of 8 men and 4 women are deciding whether she conned investors out of nearly $1 billion. This trial's been going on for 3 months. We've told you a little bit about it when it's been newsworthy enough here on this show. Prosecutors painted Holmes as a liar. They say she conned her investors as her blood test startup, Theranos, was running out of money. You remember, Holmes herself took the stand in her own defense. For 7 days, she spoke, ultimately admitting she made some mistakes, but says she believed in her company. She faces 11 counts of fraud and could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Coming up here on the show, the Pentagon making moves today to try to stop the spread of extremism in the military. The new rules, for the first time, getting really specific about social media. Courtney Kuby explains. Coming up. Just within the last few hours, we had the Pentagon making moves today to try to stop what it says is more and more extremism in the military. This has been an issue that the Pentagon has been working to address, and now they are, right? These new rules involve keeping service members from engaging in extremist activities and lays out what troops can and cannot share on social media. I want to go to Courtney Kuby at the Pentagon. And Courtney, we're so glad to have you here because viewers of our show, NBC fans will know you have been all over this topic for, frankly, years here, right? Extremism in the military, what that means, what the military is doing to try to stop it. Talk about why this is such a focus right now for Secretary Austin. And I'm thinking, I have to think, Courtney, about what's happening in 2 weeks, which is the anniversary of the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
And January 6th of 2020, or 2021, that is really what brought this issue into a higher level of awareness for Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. So soon after he came in as Secretary of Defense here at the Pentagon, he initiated a review of extremism in the ranks. And part of the reason was there hasn't been a new policy about what extremist behavior is since 2012. So think about what's changed since then, Hallie. There's been an explosion of social media since then that's really made it more and more difficult for military leaders to figure out or to see or to control any kind of potential extremist behavior in the social media space. Secretary Austin came in. He said, we just had January 6th. We need to get a handle and see exactly what this problem is, if it's a problem for the U.S. military, and how we're going to deal with it.
So talk about, is it the social media rules that is the crux of this, right? Is that at the center of how to combat this? What's the reaction from troops? Because, you know, some of them, I would imagine, would say, I want to post what I want to post on social media, et cetera. How's this playing?
So, I mean, that is true. There are a lot of members of the military who say, well, we want to have our freedom of speech. But the reality is, when they signed up, when they took that oath, they actually gave up some of those freedoms, their ability to talk about some of these issues. So the social media really policy is really the crux of this new extremist policy. And it's really important to point out that this does not actually define any groups that are considered extremist groups that members of the military can or cannot be a part of. In fact, what it really does is identify extremist activity or behaviors and then hand it over to the commanders so they have the ability to figure out whether someone has actually violated these policies. So when you're talking about social media, think about it. when a member of the military clicks like on a social media post, is that an endorsement of that post? Is that then an extremist behavior? Well, that's the kind of decision that the commanders will have to make, and it's gonna be a real wait and see, and it's going to be something that the commanders are going to have to really decide for themselves on a case-by-case basis here. But for the first time again in nearly a decade, now there is some new guidance about what may or may not constitute extremist activity among the ranks.
Courtney Cubie live for us with that great reporting. Courtney, thank you. Appreciate it. Another day, another legal battle for former President Trump. He's suing New York's Attorney General to try and stop an investigation into his company. We're talking about that in the 5 things. Plus, the debate over vaccine mandates, you know that is getting feisty. Now the fight might be headed to the Supreme Court. Pete Williams is up next. We've been talking about how the Omicron variant seems to be everywhere in a lot of places in the U.S. It's also all around the world, but different countries are taking different tactics depending on where it is. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, those incredible new details coming out today of this daring overnight escape to freedom by those 12 kidnapped missionaries in Haiti. The Christian Aid Ministries says they got away last week by walking for miles in the dark over some really rough terrain, even with a group that included little kids. Luckily, by dawn, they had found somebody to help them make a phone call. The Christian Aid Ministries says the missionaries were not hurt, at least not physically, by the people who captured them. Number 2, former President Trump is suing New York Attorney General Letitia James in an effort to stop her investigation into his businesses. Mr. Trump is basically legally formalizing his long-held witch hunt complaint by alleging this investigation is politically motivated. James says he's just trying to keep delaying the investigation into his company. Number 3, Pope Francis is calling domestic violence against women, quote, nearly satanic. The Pope made these comments on TV to an abused woman who had to leave her home with her 4 kids. The Pope also assured her she had not lost her dignity, even with what happened. He's repeatedly called on society to protect vulnerable women at risk. Number 4, more than 300 people have been killed after last week's typhoon in the Philippines. There's huge damage, huge flooding. You're looking at some of these pictures now. It is so scary. More people are expected to be found dead as search and rescue operations continue. And number 5, global warming is melting glaciers in the Himalayas at a faster rate than anywhere else in the world. Researchers at the University of Leeds say they've lost about 40% of their area over the last couple hundred years. Why does this matter? Well, look at those valleys, right? The glaciers are a really important source of water for people living in those valleys and in the mountains just above them. So, as we talked about, Omicron is raging around the world. Those are the words of Dr. Fauci, not me. You've got countries that are scrambling to stop the spread. Israel is shutting out U.S. travelers tonight because of the variant. This is, I think this is a shot of the airport in Tel Aviv today. We're about to see it. It's pretty empty. A lot of Europe is also going on that list of no-flies. The Netherlands is closing all non-essential businesses until January 14th. They're also trying to rein in some of these holiday celebrations. And then check out the Omicron numbers in the UK. More than 8,000 cases in the past 24 hours, bringing the country's total to 45,000. For context, that is a 22% jump in just one day. The Prime Minister Boris Johnson, he's not committing just yet to beefing up restrictions, but he says the UK will not hesitate to do so if he thinks it's necessary. A lot of people across Europe don't want more restrictions. You're looking at anti-lockdown protests over the weekend in Turin, Frankfurt, Paris, Brussels. And then back here at home, you've got the vaccine mandate for businesses playing out again in the courts, with states and companies opposing the OSHA rules. They want the Supreme Court to put those rules back on hold after an appeals court let them take effect late Friday night. Justice Brett Kavanaugh says the Biden administration needs to respond to these challenges by December 30th. That's next week. I want to get right to Pete Williams, who is joining us from our Washington newsroom. All right, Pete, break this down for us, right? There's been so much back and forth. They're in place, they're on hold, they're in place, they're on hold. And now you got next week, this deadline before the end of the calendar year from the Supreme Court. What's the deal? Explain this in like human, plain English terms.
And that's only just one of them. Remember, the Biden administration has tried to impose 3 different vaccine and mask requirements. All were immediately challenged in court. So here's where they stand now. You're right. The requirements for large businesses, over 100, are now fully in effect. This is after a federal appeals court late last week lifted a court order that had put them on hold. This is as issued by OSHA, requiring businesses, larger ones, to ensure that the workforce is fully vaccinated, and workers who aren't vaccinated have to wear a mask and show a negative COVID test result at least once a week. Several businesses, organizations, and states that were opposed to that, they're the ones asking the Supreme Court to put the stay back in place, which would again put the OSHA rules on hold. And the Supreme Court, as you noted, says the Biden administration must respond to that request by December 30th. So that's one. There's a separate federal rule requiring healthcare workers to be vaccinated. That's now in effect, but only in half the country.
Right.
2 federal appeals courts have blocked that enforcement in a total of 24 states, but it's in effect in the other 26. And the Biden administration is asking the Supreme Court to lift those 2 stays and allow enforcement of that nationwide. That's the rule that applies to healthcare workers in any facility that treats Medicare and Medicaid patients. And then the third one is the requirement for federal contractors. That one is on hold nationwide, and it's not going anywhere for a while. It was blocked by a federal judge in Georgia. The Justice Department has appealed, but any ruling on that motion probably won't come for several more weeks.
So you've got the Supreme Court looking, or at least involved with, 2 of those 3 cases that you laid out, Pete. You are a man of magic and mystery, but I know you don't have a crystal ball. Could you at least read some of the tea leaves? Looking at the past rulings from the Supreme Court, do you have any sense, as somebody who observes these justices, as to where some of those cases might go?
Well, remember that the cases that we have seen so far sort of are in 3 categories. Very early on, the attempts to say the states were going too far by restricting religious services. And the court, once Ruth Bader Ginsburg left and Amy Coney Barrett arrived, was pretty consistently agreeing with the challengers there and trimming back state authority to do that. Then we got the second group, which is more recent cases where states or universities have imposed vaccine requirements with various kinds of religious exceptions, and the Supreme Court hasn't really taken the challenges. Now we get into a third category that looks at the federal government's authority to do this. And it's going to be case by case, because in one case you're looking at whether the government has the authority under OSHA rules, in the second under health care, and the third under federal procurement rules. So it's not going to be necessarily a consistent answer to that question. It'll be very fact-bound, not a constitutional question, but a question of whether the statutes allow them to do this.
So from a legal perspective, what should these companies be doing in the meantime?
Well, the companies are saying that, right now OSHA is saying, we're going to enforce these rules again. We'll give you a little slack. Because of this has been so confusing, we're not going to start citing companies for non-compliance here until we get into January. We'll give you a break. But companies have to know that, at least as it stands now, they've got to obey the OSHA requirement.
Pete Williams, live for us there in our Washington newsroom. Pete, thank you so much for breaking that down. Appreciate it. It's a personal and very real struggle that a lot of women may not feel comfortable talking about, and that's the struggle with infertility. Our own Chanel Jones is following 5 women of color on their reproductive journeys in a brand new documentary. She's joining me for the backstory tonight. I can't wait for this right after the break. Homelessness is a problem all across the country, but one county in California says it has a plan to end it altogether by 2025. That's a tall order. So Jake Ward tells us more in the original about how they plan to execute on that. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Out of our Southeast Bureau, a restaurant in North Carolina is getting a helping hand from a new quote-unquote employee during these tough times, a robot named Servy. The restaurant's owner, Alex Ramos, says Servy's been a hit with customers. Not meant to replace staff, Ramos is very clear on that, but just relieve some of the stress they're feeling because of staff shortages. Also from our Southeast Bureau, doing double duty in The Local, Christmas coming early for kids at this hospital in Clearwater, Florida. Look at this, Santa making a guest appearance as some of these first responders came by to deliver toys to kids ahead of the holidays. He's waving to kids in the windows from outside. That's really sweet. You want another sweet one? I do. It's a holiday week, gang. We're doing it all. We're doing a lot of Santa hats. Look at these adorable kids. This one's out of our Northeast Bureau. Hospital workers in New London got a very special surprise. 4th graders from a nearby school stopping by to deliver cards, thanking them for being on the front lines of the pandemic. The hospital's chief medical officer said it was the highlight of everyone's day. We're going to bring you sweet holiday stories all week. I promise you that. Time now to get to our backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. Here in this country, you've got more than 6 million women who experience difficulty getting pregnant or staying pregnant. Our own Chanel Jones at NBC wanted to get into this to show how women are dealing with this, right? Something that a lot of women experience but aren't always comfortable talking about. So in her very first documentary called Stories We Tell, The Fertility Secret, Chanel introduces us to 5 women of color who also happen to be some of her closest friends for a really honest and really vulnerable conversation about the pain of infertility, the physical pain, the emotional pain. They talk about going through things like IVF, surrogacy, miscarriages. Chanel wanted to focus on black women in particular because of their really unique struggle with this issue. Studies confirming black women are more likely than white women to have fertility problems, but way less likely to get infertility treatment. We want to play a little bit from the documentary. Watch.
Thinking about my journey through womanhood, there were times when I had no one to talk to, and you learn so much you didn't know about other people the moment you start to open up. Sometimes you just have to take the first step. You shouldn't be alone in this, and I think you feel less shame because you feel less alone. But there is such a community in sharing.
A community in sharing. That's gorgeous. Chanel is joining us now to talk more about this. Hi, friend. I love you so much, and I'm so glad that you're on the show to talk about this.
I'm loving the show. The local, like you
girl,
have you have a permanent viewer in me, my friend.
Okay, I'm going to hold you to that, lady. No, listen, we wanted to have you on to talk about this. And, you know, so the backstory, since this is your first time, is really about the reporter, your journey telling this story, right? And I have to ask, like, this is so personal for you. I know this probably feels, I have to imagine, really vulnerable for you, right? What got you over that line to actually share this publicly?
You're so right. This is probably the biggest weight I've ever felt in my career.
Wow.
I'm 43 years old, and I have been dealing with this privately with my friends for years. And the reality is, I suffered a miscarriage before my first child, but then after that, I didn't have any trouble. I had one, he's now 12, and then I had twins. And it's interesting because I would go home and I'm talking to some of my girlfriends in the background, my kids are screaming in the background, and they were having problems. And Hallie, I have to tell you, I started to feel helpless. I didn't know what to say. And the years are going by and it's getting harder and harder to find words to say. And I thought, you know what? I'm not a doctor. I'm not a researcher, but I'm a storyteller. So for me, this was my way of trying to help. I mean, I'm 43 years old, and I remember early in my career, my early 20s, one of my best friends, she was constantly having fibroid surgery. And at the time, we just thought it was normal. So she would go, she would have them removed, she would come back to work. A couple of days later, we're back out reporting again. And now in our 40s, she's having problems having a child. And we never knew that all those surgeries decades before would lead to trouble. And she's not the only one in my life who is having these same problems. So I thought, okay, enough is enough. I have to talk about this.
And I'm so glad you are. I think about my own experiences with friends, some of whom are telling me, real early on in their pregnancy that they're pregnant, right? Before that, like 12-week marker, which I think in the minds of some people, that helps lift the stigma a little bit, that if there is a miscarriage, it's okay to talk about it, right? If it's something you want to do. But what is so powerful about this documentary is that you had your friends talking about it. Listen, my friends know I'm in news, and half the time they're like, do not put me on TV. How 100%. Did you convince your friends to get on?
It was a challenge in that, look, they're all working, they're married. And so by me talking with my girlfriends, that means I'm friends with their husbands too. And my husband is friends with their husbands. So, it's a whole ripple effect. The woman you see here, that's my sister-in-law. I'm about to be with her tomorrow for the holidays and my husband's entire family. And so to say that I felt a weight to honor their stories and to handle their stories with care is the biggest understatement of the century. But I think they know where my heart is. They know where my intention is. And I think a lot of them have felt isolated. They felt alone. They haven't felt seen. There have been times where, we're going to rerun this. So if you haven't had a chance to see it, they've gone to doctor's appointments and they haven't felt seen and affirmed. And I think for the sake of our daughters and girls who are coming up after us, I think they felt like this is bigger than all of us.
It starts to choke me up a little bit to hear you talk about this and to hear you talk about the response you've gotten. So this is aired, right? But it's re-airing on December 26th. We're going to promote it right after we finish talking here. But you've gotten tons of messages from viewers, from people in your life, right? From people who are so grateful to you for connecting them in this community.
It has been overwhelming. I figured this would be a topic because we haven't really talked about it. We've talked slowly but surely. We're starting to talk about infertility, egg freezing, surrogacy. But I felt like when I was flipping through magazine pages and, seeing some of the coverage, I didn't feel like I saw anybody who looked like me. And so I think there are several layers to it. For one, there are little girls like me who are watching who feel affirmed because they see me talking about it, and they see, frankly, 6 women of color in prime time talking about fertility, which is something you never see. But I also believe that it transcends race. All of our friends are going through this. I remember, I use this analogy that I watch Sex and the City and I still see myself as Charlotte. Like, I'm not right, but it is what it is. And so I think it's a human story. It's a female story. And I think together, look, as cheesy as it sounds, when women come together and we say enough is enough, we're tired of the veils, we literally can shift. We can create a groundswell. I mean, look at history. Look at Me Too. When women have said enough is enough, we change things. And so I think when it comes to fertility and all of these veils around not being able to say that you're on your period or not being able to say that you're cramping. I mean, one of the girls, my sister-in-law, she passed out at 11 in middle school, and they gave her Tylenol and gave her some 7-Up, and she went back to class. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, so that means it's been decades in the making. And so my hope is that if there are moms around the country watching with their daughters, that maybe they'll have conversations with them if they had any challenges. The next time you go to an OBGYN or a pediatrician, you say, hey, we're having some trouble. Or the next time you're recommended maybe for surgery, you can ask questions. Like, I'm just really hoping we can start to have these conversations. Why are we carrying these secrets as if nothing is wrong? You have a miscarriage, and then a couple of days later, you're back at work as if you didn't suffer this loss.
Right. It's such an important topic. I mean, I think about my own daughter, right? The younger, the better. Lift that shame now, right? Lift that stigma around things like periods, around things like, you talk about puberty, et cetera. Do it now, right? Do it with this next generation.
Absolutely. Even my husband was like, oh my gosh, I feel like, he's more aware, even for our own daughter. And I have to tell you, Hallie, he didn't even know his own sister was going through all of this because she was kind of keeping it a secret. It was hard for him to watch this documentary. Since this is the behind the scenes story, I will tell you, every night for the last 6 months, I've had my laptop open. I had 13 hours of footage and I had 44 minutes to tell the story with commercials. And so I was constantly listening to his sister's story, and he would roll over and be like, can you please put in your earbuds? Like, he was like, I can't.
Wow, Chanel.
He really struggled with it, and he didn't want to hear it. And I made him come to the screening, and I said, your sister is coming. Our families are coming. You have to, this is your sister. Like, you got to do this. And so he sat in that theater like the rest of us, and he was moved and had no idea what
That's amazing. We literally could probably talk for another 45 minutes about this. I'm so glad for you for coming on. Thank you so much. I'm so excited for people who have not already seen it to see it again. Chanel, love you. Thank you. Thank you. Stories We Tell, The Fertility Secret, is going to re-air Christmas Day at 11 o'clock Eastern and on December 26th at 10 o'clock Eastern in the evening on MSNBC. We want to turn now to today's original with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching, of course, homelessness, a growing problem, all around the country, right? And in fact, the number of people experiencing homelessness has grown for 4 straight years, with the pandemic probably making it worse. It's an issue across the country everywhere, right? But in California's Santa Clara County, home to 3 of the nation's 5 biggest tech companies, Apple, Google, and Facebook, there is a real stark contrast between the haves and the have-nots. But the county has a plan in action to try to bring people out of homelessness. Jake Ward tells us what it is.
The face of homelessness has changed. As you can see, so a lot of people that I've talked to right here at this encampment, what they've shared with me is that they lost their housing because of a loss of a job, loss of income.
And now they're here living in the flight path right by the airport. Claudine Sapili was once without shelter. Now, as part of a program called City Team, she helps her neighbors here in San Jose, California.
So how long have you been in this spot?
Teresa Said says she used to get by on gig work and state assistance for raising her disabled son. But in 2019, she lost custody.
And then COVID hit 2 weeks later, and then so I couldn't keep my rental, and then the car was gone. And I've been fighting ever since.
At the beginning of the pandemic, this was just an open field, but today it is filled with people who have fallen out of jobs and homes. There are RVs, cars, even boats all around me. In this one county, more than 10,000 people are living in circumstances like these. This encampment is within a few miles of Apple, Intel, Cisco, Google, with a collective market capitalization in the trillions of dollars. But their presence has helped to make this place unaffordable.
Outside of climate change, inequity is the most important issue that we're going to wrestle with as a society. When COVID hit, we raised close to $40 million in partnership with these companies to be able to pay people's rent. So we live in a community that's willing to help each other, but this inequity is beyond charity.
The situation requires big changes and big money. Back in 2016, county residents approved nearly $1 billion in bonds and have housed more than 14,000 people. The county has built tiny homes of hope, Casitas de Esperanza, to transition families with children out of homelessness. 40 families live here now. The residents have given the homes names like Pride and Family.
We tried to make it cozy, even though it's, shelters.
The Castañeda family got theirs after sharing one bedroom and surviving on convenience store food.
There is a heater which keeps us warm, and there's AC too when it was hot, so it's a good thing. Our own bed, warm, so it was pretty good.
Even though it's small, but it's way better than where we were before.
Alexandria Uria and her baby had been sleeping in her car.
She was maybe like 3 months old. Yeah, it sucked. We're hoping to get housed. Like our next step, we've just been applying for apartments.
These 10-foot by 10-foot homes cost $10,000 apiece. Santa Clara County aims to house 1,200 families in the next year and then 600 every year thereafter as part of their Heading Home program. But California's governor pledged to build 3.5 million units of permanent housing by 2025. At even $200,000 per home, and that's conservative, that's $700 billion. Standing here, one can sense both the incredible need for that kind of money and the presence of enormous wealth just a few miles away. Right now, we're within 10 miles of some of the biggest companies in the world.
Yes.
Can you feel any of that living unhoused here, do you think?
If you don't feel it, then something is wrong with you.
Jake Ward is joining us to talk more about the reporting. Jake, I'm so struck by that last scene that you just showed, right? It's money, right? It's people who are struggling without it, and then people who have so much of it. Talk about just how wide this wealth gap is.
It is extraordinary, Hallie, to be in a place like this where, if you find a 2-bedroom home that costs less than $1 million, then you have found, an incredible deal. I mean, the incredible amount of money that it costs to get into a home here in the Bay Area as compared to the incredible wealth that we have here, and then to stand there among 10,000 people in the county struggling to find even shelter over their heads. I mean, at this point, we're definitely looking at a state where a $15 minimum wage cannot get you the $2,400 a month you need to rent a home here. So what we've definitely seen in this reporting and throughout the pandemic, the housing crisis, all of it, is that this is not a problem that the market is going to fix. Something huge and structural and probably state-sponsored has to come in here and save the day, Hallie.
Jake Ward, it's incredible reporting. We're so grateful to you for bringing us tonight's original. Thank you, friend. Coming up here on the show, a really surprising twist in a story we've been watching around that Chinese tennis star, Peng Shuai, who now says, she never accused anyone of sexual assault. What? Janice Mackey-Freyer is joining us from Beijing for more on this bizarre backtrack. A post on a Chinese tennis star's social media account accused a former Chinese vice premier of sexual assault, setting off a global firestorm. But now Peng Shuai is apparently taking it back. She was recorded over the weekend in this video. You're looking at it, smiling and laughing with basketball star Yao Ming and some other athletes at this ski event in Shanghai. Then, in another video posted by a journalist from Chinese state media, this is it. Peng contradicts the initial accusations posted on her social media account, saying, "I have never said or written about anyone sexually assaulting me." All of this, right, is renewing concern that she is being censored. We should note that NBC News has not verified these videos, but it seems like the first time we're hearing from her directly. Janice Mackey-Freyer is in Beijing for us. Janice, you've been on this show, I think, half a dozen times talking about this story, right? We know that there was this post on Peng Shuai's account that said she was assaulted. Now she's saying, no, I wasn't. What is going on here?
Well, there have been so many twists and turns in this story, as we know, and this seems to be wanting people to go in another direction. There are two things that could be happening here. First of all, that Peng Shuai, who was at an event, happened to run into this reporter from a Chinese language newspaper in Singapore, not accessible to people in the Chinese mainland, ran into this reporter, gave this impromptu interview, and makes this bombshell revelation that she was not accusing anyone of sexual assault, that she said that there were a lot of misunderstandings, around that letter that was posted to her social media account back at the beginning of November, where she talked about this affair with Zhong Gaoli, a former Chinese vice premier, and this accusation that he sexually assaulted her. So there's one mind thinking she ran into this reporter, she gives this impromptu interview. That is not, of course, what most people are thinking. There is a lot of skepticism around this latest piece of evidence from Peng Shuai, that she is under pressure, severe pressure from Chinese officials and others here to try and make this scandal go away. What's curious, Hallie, is in all of these pieces of information that we've been getting from her over the last several weeks, the images, the videos, her appearances at these events, none of it is coming via state media directly. It's coming from Twitter accounts that are associated with state media journalists. This Singapore newspaper is a Chinese language newspaper. It's known to be pro-Beijing. They posted the video to their website, but anyone on the Chinese mainland would need a VPN in order to read that. So what we continue to see is this very tight management of information around the Peng Shuai story, which continues to not make waves at all here in China because people just don't know about it. The story is heavily censored, and even the word tennis is often censored on the internet.
I have 17 seconds left in the show, Janice, but I have to ask you, it created a firestorm around the world, right? Even if it didn't in China. You had the Women's Tennis Association pulling tournaments from the country, et cetera. Any reaction sort of internationally so far? I know this just happened within the last day.
Well, the WTA continues to say that there needs to be a full, fair, and transparent investigation without censorship in order for them to believe that Peng Shuai is really okay and for them to reconsider their decision to suspend all of their tournaments in mainland China and Hong Kong. And this latest piece of evidence only deepens their skepticism and their concern for Peng Shuai's safety.
Janice, delivering that in 17 seconds as requested. You're the best. Janice Mackey-Frere, thank you so much for that. And that does it for us this hour. We'll be right back here for you tomorrow, same time, same place. Coverage picks up right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.